Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine this scene described in the source material. A high-powered executive, furious over a damaged lamp that cost maybe $500.
Right.
Pulls out this massive wad of cash, like a brick of bills, and throws $5,000 at the hotel manager. Right there.
$5,000 for a $500 lamp.
Exactly. This executive, someone with obvious financial power, someone you'd assume understands money, well, he ended up going broke later in life. Now, hold that image and contrast it with Ronald Reed. Remember him?
Yeah, the janitor and gas station attendant.
From rural Vermont. First in his family to finish high school even, by, all the usual measures of sophistication, high income. He wasn't remarkable.
Not at all.
Yet, through decades of just quiet, disciplined saving and simple investing, he accumulated this fortune, enough to become a major philanthropist when he died.
That juxtaposition is so striking, isn't it? It just immediately forces you to question, well, everything you thought you knew. We're kind of conditioned to believe financial success comes from intelligence, right? Or fancy degrees, or a high-paying job. The executive had all that, seemingly, all the trappings. Yet, failure, the janitor, none of those advantages, huge success, tells you something really fundamental isn't about the numbers or the credentials.
Exactly. And that brings us right to the core premise of this deep dive. We've got this stack of source materials, specifically from excerpts of The Psychology of Money.
Right.
And our mission today is to really dive deep into these sources, pull out the most important, maybe surprising nuggets of knowledge. And the central idea that jumps out is this: doing well with money. It isn't so much about how smart you are or, how much technical finance stuff you know.
Less about IQ points.
Overwhelmingly, it's about your behavior. Behavior, as we're going to explore, it's much harder to teach, much harder to quantify than learning a formula or reading a balance sheet.
That's the crucial distinction, isn't it? The sources argue money isn't like physics. There aren't these neat universal laws you just learn and apply.
Right, it's messier.
It's way more like psychology. It's deeply personal. It's incredibly messy, driven by emotions, individual histories, biases, all of these subtle nuances.
Yeah.
Money touches everyone's life somehow, yet it confuses most of us. And in that confusion, that complexity, it actually offers some of the most potent lessons about human behavior, about risk, confidence, and ultimately what actually makes people happy.
The author even notes their own experience starting to write about finance back in, early 2008.
Right when things were getting really shaky.
Exactly. The gears of the financial crisis were grinding. And they were trying to make sense of it all, trying to explain these massive, seemingly illogical events using just, rational economic models.
Which proved difficult.
Incredibly difficult. They found brilliant people on all sides with convincing, rational arguments that often completely contradicted each other about why things were happening or why they should be happening differently. That period really hammered home the idea that pure logic, rational models, they often aren't the main drivers.
It's not in the real world.
Human behavior in all its, let's say, irrational glory is often in the driver's seat.
And that experience, that realization, became a foundation for the insights we're looking at today. It showed that the financial world, it's not just a simple algorithm or a perfect spreadsheet.
Yep.
It's a complex, adaptive system. Human actions shaped by things that, often defy simple logic. Fear, greed, social pressure, past trauma. They play this huge, often decisive role. And that undeniable truth that behavior trumps intelligence when it comes to money. That's really where we need to begin this deep dive.
Okay, so let's really focus on that first big point. Behavior trumps intelligence. Yeah. We started with that powerful contrast, right? The executive versus Ronald Reed.
Yeah.
The executive, likely highly intelligent, maybe he had formal finance training, vast experience in complex deals, you name it.
All the credentials.
Yet his behavior unpredictable, maybe ego-driven, throwing cash around, taking huge risks perhaps led him to ruin. His intelligence, his potential mastery of the mechanics, it just couldn't save him from his flawed behavior.
Meanwhile, Ronald Reed, he wasn't doing anything fancy. No complex portfolios, no market timing.
Simple stuff.
Incredibly simple things. Living frugally, saving consistently, investing in reliable stuff like blue chip stocks for decades. His success wasn't about intellectual firepower. It was behavioral endurance.
Behavioral endurance. I like that.
Patience, discipline, humility. He avoided debt. He avoided lifestyle inflation, the very things that trip up so many people who earn way more money than he ever did.
And that really highlights the challenge the sources point out, right?
Yeah.
Technical financial skills, learning how to value a stock, calculate interest, set a budget. Those are, relatively speaking, easy to teach.
You can write them down.
Yeah, put them in a textbook, practice in a classroom. They're technical. But how do you teach someone patience? Effectively teach it.
Or resilience, emotional resilience when the market tanks.
Exactly. How do you instill the discipline to save consistently when everything is screaming at you to spend? Or resist that powerful social pressure to constantly upgrade your life?
You can't, really. Not in the same way. These are behavioral skills. They're far more deeply ingrained, much harder to transmit through, formal education. It's why two people with the exact same finance degree can end up in wildly different places financially.
Yeah.
Their understanding of the mechanics might be identical, but their internal operating system, their behavior dictates how they actually apply that knowledge, or whether they can stick to a rational plan when fear or greed kicks in.
So money isn't just math.
Not at all. It's a psychological tool. It acts like a mirror, reflecting our deepest beliefs, our fears, our hopes, our ability or inability to control impulses. And because it touches everyone, it offers these universal lessons about, just being human.
Okay, building on that, this idea of behavior being so central.
Yeah.
One of the most, I think, profound points from the sources is the overwhelming weight of personal history in shaping how we see money.
Oh, this concept is truly eye-opening. The idea is that every single one of us, including you listening right now, sees the world of money through this lens that's uniquely warped by your own life experiences.
Like a filter.
Exactly. The sources make this point that your personal history, everything you've seen and lived through with money, it's just a tiny fraction of global economic history, like maybe 0.0000001% of everything that's ever happened financially.
Almost nothing in the grand scheme.
Right. But that tiny, tiny sliver of experience, it can easily account for 80% or more of how you believe money works, how the economy functions, what risks feel okay to take.
It's like living in this bubble of your own past. If you grew up, say, where money was really scarce and debt was terrifying, your whole approach to risk, saving, spending, it's going to be profoundly different from someone who grew up wealthy, where investing was normal and security was just assumed.
Their lived experiences with the consequences of decisions are just worlds apart. Think about the difference between someone who actually lived through the high inflation of the 70s.
The gas lines, yeah.
Remembering gas lines, seeing prices double, feeling your paycheck just shrink in value every year, versus someone born in the late 90s who's mostly seen stable prices.
It's abstract for the younger person.
Totally. For the older generation, inflation is this visceral, maybe terrifying memory that dictates how they save or invest. For the younger one, it's like a chapter in an economics textbook? Maybe.
The sources give other examples too, like the stockbroker who lost everything in the Great Depression. Their experience. Someone working in tech during the dot-com boom just can't fully grasp that feeling no matter how many books they read.
And even where you live matters. An Australian who hasn't seen a recession in 30 years, they'll naturally see economic stability differently than an American who navigated 2008 firsthand.
So the crucial takeaway here, according to the sources, isn't that these differences in how people view money are about intelligence or information or education level?
Not primarily, no.
It stems from different life experiences, different economic worlds they've lived in, and each person's view, even if it seems crazy to someone else, feels completely valid and logical to them because it's rooted in their own deeply felt history.
Which also explains why just studying history, while valuable intellectually, often isn't enough to actually change our behavior.
Right. You can read about the Great Depression.
You can understand it conceptually, see the photos, analyze the data, but you cannot recreate that raw, gut-wrenching fear and uncertainty of living through it, of seeing your savings vanish, losing your job, no safety net. As Michael Batnick is quoted saying, some lessons have to be experienced before they can be understood.
That hits hard.
You might get the concept of financial ruin from a book, but until you've felt the emotional scars of living through a crisis, your behavior probably isn't going to be truly shaped by that knowledge. We're all kind of victims of this truth. Our personal felt history often olifides our intellectual understanding.
And this isn't just theory. The sources mention a big study from 2006, Malmendier and Nagel.
Yes, from the National Bureau of Economic Research. They looked at 50 years of detailed data from the Survey of Consumer Finances, tracking households across generations.
And what was the big finding?
Incredibly powerful. An individual investor's willingness to take financial risks. It depends overwhelmingly on the economic experiences they lived through during their formative years, their personal history.
More than intelligence or education.
Much more. The correlation was way stronger, more statistically significant than factors like intelligence, education level, or even financial sophistication. Basically, how much risk you're comfortable with today is heavily influenced by the dumb luck, as the sources put it.
Right.
Of when and where you were born and what the economy was doing while you were growing up and starting out.
That's profound. It suggests our financial comfort zone isn't really a product of careful, rational calculation based on knowledge.
No.
But a byproduct of the economic weather we experienced early on, kind of hardwired by experience.
It is. The sources use the example of Bill Gross, the bond king. He himself admitted a big part of his success was just being born at the right time, post-WWII, to ride this massive generational decline in interest rates.
Which made bonds super profitable during his career.
Exactly. Shaped his view of them as wealth generators. But for his father's generation, who lived through high inflation, bonds were often seen as wealth incinerators because rising prices eroded their value.
Same asset, different experiences.
Same country, different generations, vastly different views, shaped purely by the economic winds of their youth.
And you see this everywhere once you start looking.
Yeah.
The sources mention inflation in the 60s and 70s gas lines, stretching dollars versus the 90s when it was barely a thought.
Or unemployment rates in 2009. A black male teen without a diploma, nearly 50% unemployment. An older, white, college-educated woman, maybe 4%. Those are fundamentally different realities that shape financial views in ways that someone outside that experience just can't fully get.
And this leads to that idea that every financial decision makes sense to the person making it. It's not about universal rationality.
Yeah.
It's about making sense within that person's unique history, their current situation, and the story they tell themselves about how the world works.
The lottery ticket example the sources use is perfect for this.
Yeah, we touched on that. The sheer amount spent is staggering. Over $80 billion a year in the U.S.
More than movies, games, music, sports, books combined. And the data's clear. It's overwhelmingly bought by lower-income households.
The sources cited, what, $412 a year on average for the lowest income groups?
Yeah, 4 times higher than the highest income groups. Now remember that other stat, 40% of Americans can't handle a $400 emergency.
So many people spending over $400 on lottery tickets are spending money they literally need for basic security on something with, astronomically low odds.
From a purely rational statistical view, especially if you're not in that income group, it looks completely crazy. Defies logic.
It really does. Why spend money you desperately need on such a long shot? But the sources push us, beyond just judging.
Right.
I try to understand the subconscious reasoning, what makes sense to them.
The idea is, for someone maybe trapped in a cycle of low wages, living paycheck to paycheck, the traditional path to financial security, saving a bit, investing long-term, building wealth slowly, it feels completely out of reach.
Like it's just not for them.
Right. The prospects of getting a big raise feel slim. Experiencing things others take for granted, owning a nice home, a real vacation, a reliable car, sending kids to college without crushing debt feels impossible through saving alone.
So in that context, the lottery ticket isn't seen as just a statistically bad bet.
No. It becomes the only realistic way, however slim the odds, to access a tangible dream of getting those things. The sources don't endorse it as smart, obviously.
Of course not.
But they explain the underlying psychological need it fulfills. You're paying for a tangible dream when the normal paths seem totally blocked.
And that insight framing seemingly crazy decisions with, okay, from my view it looks nuts, but I kind of see why you're doing it, that unlocks so much about money behavior.
It really does. It shows these decisions aren't made in a vacuum with spreadsheets. They're made in real life. Dinner table, talking to neighbors, influenced by history, culture, hopes, ego, pride, needs that don't show up on paper. Understanding that context is key.
This focus on behavior and stories brings us right up against navigating uncertainty, risk, and that huge question.
Yeah.
When is enough enough?
Yeah, and one of the hardest things to untangle in finance and life really is luck versus skill. The sources use that powerful story of Bill Gates and his friend Kent Evans.
In high school, right. Inseparable.
Both brilliant, driven, obsessed with computers, working together constantly. Gates obviously co-founds Microsoft, an unimaginable success. Evans, just as talented, tragically dies in a climbing accident right before they were launching something big.
That's just stark.
It's the reality of what the sources call life roulette. Both had immense skill, drive. But luck, one living, one dying young, played this decisive, arbitrary role.
And this feeds into that bias we have. When we see others succeed wildly, especially in investing, it's easy to say, oh, they just got lucky. Maybe a bit of jealousy in there.
But when we succeed, it's incredibly hard, almost demoralizing, to admit luck played a big part. It feels like it diminishes our hard work, our skill.
Right.
The sources mention Mazumder's study showing brothers' incomes are more correlated than height or weight, tied heavily to parent status. Yet, how many successful people chalk it up to the dumb luck of birth?
Not many. And this difficulty in separating luck and skill makes judging financial decisions in real time almost impossible too.
Exactly. You invest in a solid company, it looks good. 5 years later, it's gone nowhere. Was that a mistake?
Yeah.
Or a good decision that just hit the wrong side of probability?
The unlucky 20%.
Great. It's too hard to know day to day, so our brains want simple stories. I was right, I was wrong, based just on the outcome, not the quality of the decision process, which had uncertainty baked in.
And trying to learn repeatable lessons. It's really tricky because you can't easily isolate what was your action versus just random chance or market wins. Our brains want easy answers.
These sources give historical examples where that line between bold and reckless looks paper thin in hindsight. Cornelius Vanderbilt, the railroad guy.
Hey, I got the power.
Yeah, ignoring laws, doing whatever. It worked for him, massive wealth. But you can easily imagine an alternate history where that same behavior lands him in jail, ruined. The outcome colors how we label the decision bold or reckless, even if the risk was identical.
Or Benjamin Graham, Mr. Value Investing himself.
Yeah.
So conservative, analytical.
Yet his personal fortune was hugely weighted towards one big, early bet on Jayco, which, he admitted, broke his own rules about diversification.
Wow.
He openly questioned if it was one lucky break or one supremely shrewd decision. He got the ambiguity.
So the takeaway isn't to ignore skill, but maybe don't try to perfectly emulate extreme outliers like Buffett or Vanderbilt. Their stories likely have a huge dose of unrepeatable luck.
Right. The sources suggest focusing on broader, more repeatable patterns, like research shows control over your time strongly correlates with happiness. That's maybe more useful than trying to copy Buffett's exact timing.
Yeah, more applicable.
Bill Gates himself said, "Success is a lousy teacher. It seduces smart people into thinking they can't lose."
That's good.
When things are going incredibly well, that's when you're most vulnerable. You underestimate luck and risk, think it's all you, and maybe take on hidden dangers.
It comes back to that core idea. Nothing is as good or as bad as it seems. Things rarely stay extreme forever.
And this leads right into that critical concept,
Yeah.
knowing when you have enough. There's that great story about Kurt Vonnegut at a Billionaires party.
With Joseph Heller, yeah.
Heller points out the billionaire probably pays more in taxes than Heller earned in his life from Catch-22. But then Heller says to Vonnegut, "Yes, but I have something he will never have."
Enough.
Enough. It perfectly captures that the pursuit of more can be this endless, unsatisfying cycle no matter how much you have.
And the sources give those tragic real-world examples. Rajat Gupta.
From the slums to CEO of McKinsey, worth $100 million. More than enough.
Yet risked it all for more money through insider trading. Lost everything: fortune, freedom, reputation.
Or the guys at Long-Term Capital Management. Brilliant minds, Nobel laureates, already multimillionaires.
In a booming market.
Yet they took these massive hidden risks, chasing even more returns. Collapsed in '98. Risked everything they had and needed for what they didn't have and didn't need.
Buffett's comment on LTCM nails it. To make money they didn't have and didn't need, they risked what they did have and did need. And that's foolish.
The sources present this as one of the most fundamental yet weirdly overlooked rules of money. There is no reason to risk what you have and need for what you don't have and don't need.
And this isn't just for billionaires, right?
Absolutely not. The sources argue many people, maybe you listening, will reach a point where you have enough. Enough for your needs, reasonable wants, a comfortable life. At that point, taking big risks, excessive speculation, crippling debt for status symbols, wrecking your health for work just to pile up more money you don't actually need, it becomes well, foolish.
The hardest financial skill, the sources say, is getting the goalpost to stop moving.
Yes. That inability to just be content with enough, that constant itch for another dollar, another upgrade, that's what leads people to jeopardize the security they've already built.
And the sources list things that are never worth risking, no matter the potential gain. Reputation.
Freedom, independence, family, friends, being loved, happiness.
Knowing when you have enough financially is the best way to protect those priceless things. Because if you're always chasing more, you're more likely to compromise on what actually matters.
And the good news, the most powerful force for building enough, for getting that security, it doesn't require risking those invaluable things. It's much simpler. It's the twin powers of compounding and survival.
Compounding, often called the eighth wonder. The sources use that great analogy, the ice ages.
Yeah, beautiful analogy. These huge climate shifts weren't from some massive impact. They started with tiny, consistent changes in Earth's orbital tilt,
Just a little wobble.
causing slightly cooler summers, meaning a little bit of snow that fell in winter didn't quite melt.
And as the glaciologist said, it is not necessarily the amount of snow, but the fact that snow, however little, lasts.
That little bit of lasting snow compounded year after year, century after century, until you get massive ice sheets, miles thick. Compounding doesn't need huge force. It needs consistent growth, however small, sustained over a long, long time. Small starts, compounded, lead to extraordinary results that defy our linear thinking.
And that's the engine of wealth creation with money. Compounding is key, but often overlooked because everyone's chasing big returns now.
The sources revisit Buffett through this lens. Yes, he's a great investor, but his fortune isn't just about being good. It's overwhelmingly about being a good investor since he was a kid.
And living long enough.
Exactly. Having the longevity to let compounding work its magic for, 70 plus years?
The numbers are crazy. If he started at 30, same returns, his net worth wouldn't be $84.5 billion.
That'd be 11.9 million.
11.9 million. 99.9% of his wealth is tied to starting early and staying in the game. It's the time, the duration, that matters almost infinitely more.
They compare him to Jim Simons at Renaissance Technologies. Simons gets insane returns, like 66% annually since '88.
3 times Buffett's rate?
Right, but Simons is worth less, around $21 billion. Why? Because he didn't hit his stride until his 50s. He's only been compounding at that super high rate for less than half the time Buffett's been compounding at a merely excellent rate.
So the time factor dwarfs the return percentage over the long haul.
Hugely. The math gets silly if you project Simons' 66% over 70 years quintillions. It just highlights that extraordinary long-term results aren't about hitting impossible returns, but about the practical, often overlooked stuff, starting early and having the time.
It's counterintuitive because our brains think linearly. 8 plus 8 is 24. We don't grasp 8 times 8 times 8.
Exponential growth is weird. Bill Gates supposedly underestimated Gmail's storage needs at first because he was thinking linearly about storage growth.
But for compounding to work its magic,
Yeah.
you have to be there for the long haul. You have to survive.
Yes. The sources basically say if you boil money success down to one word, it's survival.
That's sobering. The sources mention that statistic. 40% of public companies eventually lose almost all their value. Success isn't permanent.
Michael Moritz at Sequoia Capital, he attributes their decades of success not to being smarter, but to a constant fear of going bust, assuming tomorrow won't be like yesterday, never getting complacent. Only the paranoid survive, right? Compounding needs assets to grow for decades. And over decades, stuff happens. Recessions, crashes, pandemics, personal crises, you name it. Survival means enduring those unpredictable hits so you can stay invested and capture the growth afterwards.
That's what Buffett didn't do. He didn't panic sell in bear markets. He didn't use leverage that forced him out. Survival through volatility let compounding happen.
And this is where things like cash and liquidity show their real value. It's not just the tiny interest rate, it's survival value.
The buffer.
Yeah. Having cash prevents you from being forced to sell long-term assets at terrible prices during a panic. Avoiding just one desperate, ill-timed sale can literally be worth more over your lifetime than picking dozens of winners.
So it's not just about chasing the highest returns, it's about good, consistent returns, and crucially, sustaining them uninterrupted, especially through chaos.
That consistency, that survival, lets compounding work, which leads right into planning for the unplannable and the vital role of room for error.
This feels critical. The sources say you have to plan on the plan not going according to plan.
Right, like the old saying, man plans, God laughs. Financial planning is essential, gives you a framework, helps you see if goals are reasonable, but very few complex plans survive reality untouched.
Just look at the last 20 years. 9/11, housing bubble, financial crisis, the long bull run after, COVID. Who predicted all that accurately?
Nobody. A truly robust plan, the sources argue, doesn't try to predict specifics. It embraces an unknown future and prioritizes building in room for error, a margin of safety.
A plan gets fragile when it needs specific things to be true, like market returns must be 8% every year, or no unexpected big expenses ever.
Right. The sources give a simple example, your savings rate. Instead of needing 8% returns, maybe save enough so you're okay, even if returns are only 4%. That extra saving is room for error. It makes the plan resilient.
This connects to normalizing failure and understanding tail events.
Yeah, the sources use that brain analogy. Getting smarter involves pruning weak connections. Destruction leads to growth. In finance, things fail. Investments, companies. It's normal. We overreact because it feels like a setback, but it's often part of the process.
And tail events, those are the rare outlying things, right? Black swans.
Exactly, not the average stuff. The extreme successes or devastating losses.
Right.
And often these tails drive the majority of the results.
Like in venture capital. Most investments fail, a few do okay.
And one or two bonanzas drive basically all the returns for the fund. The average performance is almost irrelevant. It's the tail successes.
And it's not just VC. That JP Morgan data on the Russell 3000, 40% of stocks lost most of their value and never recovered.
Yet the index did well because a tiny percentage, it's 7%, were extraordinary performers that offset all the losers. Most public companies are duds long-term. It's the tail winners that matter.
So for individual investors, the most important decisions aren't the everyday ones. They're during those rare, extreme moments, maybe 1% of the time when everyone else is freaking out or getting wildly euphoric.
The sources use that Sue, Jim, and Tom example, investing $1 a month from 1900 to 2019.
Sue just invested consistently through everything. Jim and Tom tried to time recessions.
And Sue, by just sticking with it, enduring the roughly 22% of months that were recessionary, she ended up with way more money, like 75% more. Her endurance during the tough times paid off massively.
Jeff Bezos talking about Amazon's failures, like the Fire Phone.
Yeah, they're fine with big failures because they're working on bigger successes. Failures are offset by the pale events, like AWS. You have to survive the failures to be around for the hits.
George Soros said it. It's not whether you're right or wrong, but how much money you make when you're right and how much you lose when you're wrong.
Exactly. You can be wrong most of the time, but if your wins are huge tail events and your losses are limited, you can still win big. And being around for those tails requires survival.
So room for error isn't just conservative, it enables boldness.
It absolutely does. It gives you the endurance to stick around through bad luck and mistakes. It keeps you in the game for those low probability, high impact tails, letting compounding happen.
The blackjack analogy. Even with an edge, you need a bankroll. Room for error.
Right. You can't bet everything because you don't know the next card, the next quarter. Room for error protects you from the risks you see. And crucially, the unknown unknowns, the stuff you can't even imagine.
Like a pandemic.
Exactly. Charlie Munger is saying, the best way to achieve felicity is to aim low. Not low ambition, but building a margin of safety. Assume lower returns, higher costs. Lowers the odds of ruin.
And the warning against leverage? It turns routine risks into potential ruin.
Masks the risk most of the time, but wipes you out in a downturn. Takes away the chance to buy back in when things are cheap.
The barbell strategy makes sense then. Aggressive with one part, terrified with the other.
Ensures survival, so the risky bets have a chance to pay off. The ability to just do what you want when you want for as long as you want, that has infinite ROI.
And saving just for saving's sake, not for a specific goal.
It's a hedge against life's inevitable surprises. An investment in future flexibility and control.
Okay, this understanding of behavior, uncertainty, survival. It leads to another key point. You are not a spreadsheet.
Fundamental. We're not rational machines, we're human. As the source put it, screwed up, emotional people.
Yeah.
So financial decisions aren't made in a vacuum based on numbers. They happen in real life with social stuff, emotions.
The sources use that fascinating medical example. Wagner Jareg winning a Nobel Prize for giving people malaria to cure syphilis.
Right. Inducing high fevers helped kill the syphilis. Rationally, within the medical knowledge then, it had a basis.
But fevers hurt. We all take Tylenol to reduce fever.
Exactly. Why? Because it's reasonable to want relief from pain now, even if there's some abstract, rational benefit to letting it run. A doctor's goal isn't just the theoretically optimal outcome, it's finding a path that's tolerable for the patient.
And in finance, decisions are made around the dinner table, talking to your spouse, seeing neighbors, dealing with your own doubts. Minimizing future regret might be hard to quantify.
But it's a perfectly reasonable driver of decisions.
The sources contrast a purely rational strategy, like using extreme leverage, because mathematically you can just start over if wiped out.
With the unreasonable reality, no normal person who loses everything just dusts themselves off and does the exact same thing. The emotional, social cost of ruin is immense. It changes you.
And being able to commit to a strategy, especially through tough times, is crucial for long-term results.
The odds of making money in stocks are 50-50 daily, but approach 100% over 20 years, historically. Anything that helps you stick with a sound strategy through the lean years, loving your work, a supportive partner, just patience puts those long-term odds in your favor. Endurance, fueled by reasonable choices, beats rational optimization you can't stick to.
Other examples where reasonable beats rational. Home bias. Investing mostly in your own country.
Not purely rational, but familiarity helps commitment. Makes it reasonable for you.
Day trading with a tiny bit of money.
Irrational for wealth maximization, maybe? But reasonable if it scratches an itch and doesn't risk your real savings. Like Josh Brown said, okay, if you know it's a video game, not retirement.
Making forecasts. Terrible track record, but reasonable human nature.
Yeah, we want to know the future. Acting on them is dangerous, but making them feels reasonable. Even Jack Bogle investing in his son's active funds.
Yeah, contradicted his whole philosophy rationally.
But in a father-son relationship, perfectly reasonable. Human connections matter more than spreadsheets sometimes.
This human element also drives the social game of money.
Oh yeah. So much consumer spending is driven by social comparison, wanting admiration. We buy fancy cars, big houses, expensive clothes.
Hoping others will admire us.
But the paradox. People see the fancy car and often think, wow, if I had that car. They admire the object. They use you as a benchmark for their own desires. The person driving, often less noticed than the thing.
That's a tough pill to swallow, maybe.
The point isn't to stop pursuing wealth, but recognize that buying fancy stuff brings less respect than you imagine. Humility, kindness, empathy, those generate real admiration.
And this ties into wealth is what you don't see. The author's valet story in LA.
Yeah, assuming Ferrari drivers were rich, then finding out many spent a huge chunk of income or borrowed heavily just for the car.
As Bill Mann said, no faster way to feel rich than spend lots of money. But the way to be rich is to spend money you have and not spend money you don't have.
That's the core difference. Rich is current income, seen and spent. Wealth is hidden. Assets you accumulate by not spending.
So building wealth has less to do with income or returns and way more to do with savings rate.
It's the gap between income and ego, controlling spending today for more options tomorrow. You can't build wealth if your spending goalpost keeps moving up with your income.
The energy crisis analogy. Efficiency mattered more than finding more oil.
Exactly. Saving is financial efficiency, decreasing the money you need, which is way more in your control than income or market returns.
And saving just for saving's sake, the ultimate hedge against surprises. Investing in future flexibility.
Okay, drawing towards the end here, let's hit two more key concepts: the limits of history and forecasting our changing selves.
History. The sources say it's a useful guide, calibrates expectations, shows pitfalls, but not a map to the future, especially in finance, which evolves.
Right. The historians as prophets fallacy. Over-relying on past data is dangerous when the game itself changes. Finance isn't like geology or medicine where rules are constant. Kidneys work the same. Economies, markets, instruments, they change.
The structural changes are huge. The 401k didn't exist before 78, Roth IRA 98. Venture capital is relatively new. Historical data from before these things only tells you so much.
Benjamin Graham admitted his own classic formulas became less useful over time. Competition, tech, industry shifts. The further back you look, the less applicable history might be.
And that phrase, "it's different this time," often mocked. But sometimes it is different.
John Templeton said it's different maybe 20% of the time, and that's what gets you. Michael Batnick's counterphrase, the 4 most dangerous words are, it's different this time. We resist acknowledging change.
This links back to tail events and failure of imagination. A few rare events drive most outcomes.
Great Depression, WWII, vaccines, 9/11, internet. And they compound unpredictably. like 9/11 leading to low rates, fueling housing bubble, causing financial crisis, leading to poor job market, pushing college enrollment, creating student debt crisis.
Not intuitive at all.
But that's how compounding tail events reshape the world. We fail to imagine how different the future can be. Forecasting usually just extends the past.
Kahneman's point. The lesson from wrong forecasts isn't just avoiding that mistake. It's learning the world is difficult to anticipate. The world is surprising. The only reliable forecast is that surprises move the needle most.
And in a surprising world, pessimism often sounds smarter, gets more attention.
Why is that?
Bad news affects everyone. Money is universal. Progress is slow, easy to miss. Setbacks are fast, dramatic, impossible to ignore. Growth compounds slowly. Destruction can be instant. Pessimism uses recent data. Optimism needs longer perspective.
The 2008 WSJ article predicting the U.S. breakup got front-page coverage. Extreme optimism rarely does.
The Times Square alien example, 2007 versus 2009, looked similar outside, but the narrative shifted from confidence to fear, causing the recession. Narrative damage is potent.
And under high stakes, limited info. People believe desperate things, plague victims, trying anything.
In finance, listening to unreliable tips, falling for frauds like Madoff because they offered a story people wanted to believe.
The antidotes. Room for error, flexibility, independence, reduces the stakes, gives breathing room.
Finally, that psychological twist. The end of history illusion. We're bad at forecasting our future selves.
We think who we are now is who we'll always be. Underestimate change.
Gilbert's research shows this across ages. People always think they'll change less in the future than they did in the past.
Huge challenge for long-term financial planning. How do you stick to a 40-year plan when you will fundamentally change? Your values, goals, definition of success.
The banker who burns out, the lawyer wanting to stay home, the retiree unprepared because priorities shifted late. It happens all the time.
Endurance is key for compounding careers, savings, relationships. Hard to endure if things feel wrong for who you've become.
The strategy. Avoid extremes. Desperate low income today or endless stressful work. High odds of future regret. The benefits wear off. Downsides become enduring regrets for your future self.
Balance encourages endurance, moderate savings, free time, manageable commute. Throughout life, more adaptable.
And let go of sunk costs. Don't let past efforts trap your future self. Your past self was different. Kahneman saying, I have no sunk costs when abandoning research. Abandon outdated goals without mercy to minimize future regret.
Wow. Okay, we've covered a massive amount. Behavior over intelligence, personal history, luck, compounding, survival, room for error, being human, limits of history, changing selves.
It really underscores how much of our financial lives are shaped by things beyond just math. Psychology, history, emotion, time.
Understanding these human dimensions is often way more impactful than mastering complex models.
Absolutely. The author shares those personal examples. His parents' frugality, creating independence, letting his dad quit a stressful job early.
That's powerful. Behavior, not income, created freedom.
He and his wife stopping lifestyle inflation, keeping the goalpost fixed, building their own independence fund.
Owning the house outright.
Right.
Not purely rational financially maybe, but reasonable for peace of mind. Choosing happy over right.
And keeping lots of cash. Not defensible on paper for returns, but works for them. Cash as oxygen of independence, avoiding forced selling, matching their risk tolerance.
It shows applying. This isn't about finding one optimal way. It's about understanding the forces, knowing yourself, defining your enough, prioritizing survival and flexibility, and making reasonable choices for your life.
Exactly. True financial well-being isn't just numbers growing, it's control. Flexibility, peace of mind, aligning money with human needs and values, accepting uncertainty.
Hopefully this deep dive gives you, the listener, a new lens on your own relationship with money, recognizing those hidden psychological historical forces.
It's a journey of self-discovery as much as finance.
So, as you reflect, here's a final thought. What deeply held financial belief do you have right now that after hearing all this, you realize might be less about rational analysis and more a direct product of the unique economic and social world you grew up in, your personal history?
Consider how your past might be anchoring your views on risk, debt, saving, spending, maybe in ways you haven't fully seen. And are those anchors still serving you today?
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a fascinating exploration. Money really isn't just numbers, is it?
Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to ReadersPair, where two readers bring you one book and endless insights. See you in the next chapter.